Hello everyone and welcome back to another discussion video on this channel. Now I don't know if I'm going to finish this video on Planes 2's anniversary or later, but either way, happy, wait, how many years was it now? 8th anniversary. You're telling me that 2014 was 8 years ago already. How the Well, anyway, to properly give an introduction to this movie, we'll have to travel all the way back to the early 2010s. The year was 2013. Cars 2 was released 2 years ago and it made a lot of money in merchandise sales. So of course, Disney wanted to capitalize on the success of this 2-movie franchise so far. But of course, Pixar wouldn't do it, so Disney decided to do it themselves. And bam! Planes was born. And just to give my quick opinions on it here, it was bad. The writing was terrible, the international characters were just stereotypes of their countries, there were cliches everywhere, and it was a ripoff of both Cars movies in every single aspect. Wow, a movie about planes in the world of Cars? Maybe we'll get to see other aspects about the Cars universe and it's about racing again. Because of course it had to be. Well, hey, at least the characters could be awesome and original. The characters are just ripoffs of already existing characters in the Cars movies. Yippee. Oh, wait. The movie is about a plane who's afraid of heights and doesn't want to listen to his coach because of his fear of heights, which he gets rewarded for in most of the races? Maybe they could put a spin on the classic underdog story where they teach the kids watching that you don't have to do things that you're not comfortable with and, Dusty gets over his fear of heights. Because of course he did. Yeah, I think you've heard it all from other members of the Cars community. But what you might have not known about before is that this movie actually got a sequel. And literally not even a year after the first one. At first I neglected this movie. I saw how bad the first one was and I don't think I even watched it except once, and even then, I wasn't really paying attention. The movie was sorta just playing in the background while I was doing some other stuff. But then people started to talk about it again, and it sparked my interest. I rewatched it and actually paid attention to it, and oh boy, is it a huge improvement over the first movie. And you might be asking, why? Well, I'll explain why later. But in order to do that, I must give a quick summary of the plot of Planes 2 for the people who didn't watch it or don't really remember it that well. Ever since the events of the Wings Around the Globe rally, Dusty Crawpopper was having a successful racing career. But one day when he was training, his gearbox got busted. This didn't seem like a big deal to Dusty at first, until he was informed that his gearbox was out of production, meaning that he has to back off the torque and keep it under 80%, which wouldn't be convenient for racing, which could mean the end of his racing career. Dusty was not happy about this and one night decided to test his limits in the sky, but ended up losing control and causing a fire. Prop Wash Junction's fire truck, Mayday, tried to put out the fire using his hose, but because he was getting old, his hose was all scratched up and full of holes, meaning he couldn't get the necessary amount of water to put out the fire. His only solution was to take down the old water tower, with the help of Dusty and some of his friends. But that caused a lot of damage and wasn't very convenient for putting out fires. The next morning, the TMST government forces decided to shut down the Prop Wash Junction airport until they refurbished Mayday to meet modern firefighting regulations and acquire a second backup firefighter. But Mayday's refurbishment would take too long, so they needed to get a second firefighter to fight the fires in Proposh Junction while Mayday was getting refurbished. Dusty, feeling bad for the trouble he had caused, decided to volunteer and become a certified firefighter. So he went to Piston Peak Air Attack and met a fleet of firefighters. The chief of said fleet was Blade Ranger, a stern, serious, and strict helicopter who instructed Dusty of what to do. Although some of the things Blade told Dusty to do required him to push his torque to over 80%, which he obviously couldn't do if he wanted to survive. Fearing that Blade would disqualify him from the team if he knew of his disability, he decided to make up excuses until he ran out of them and decided to tell Blade the truth after failing to put out a dangerous fire. Blade tells Dusty that being a firefighter means that you put others before yourself. And Blade and Dusty hid under an old mine, but the fire started spreading and made it to said mine. So Blade covered Dusty from the fire and got damaged in the process. The rest of the team found the two and managed to get them back to base. Dusty made it out just fine, but it was clear that Blade was not ready to start firefighting anytime soon. The fire continued to spread and got closer to the newly reopened fuselage, which Cad Spinner, Piston Peak Superintendent, was not happy about. So, much to Cad's dismay, they had to evacuate. Cad, in hopes of putting out the fire before it started damaging the lodge, rerouted the main water line to the roof sprinklers, which proved to not be helpful at all. The main exit road was blocked by some fiery logs, so Piston Peak Air Attack were called to put it out. But since the water line was rerouted, they didn't have water to make fire retardant, so they had to go with whatever they had left in their tanks. Windlifter and Little Dipper, two of the firefighters in the team, managed to put out the flames on the main exit road, so most of the cars managed to exit, except for two old RVs who were stuck somewhere far away from the main exit road. Dusty, being the plane who could get there the fastest, decided to be the one who'd rescue them. Dusty had no retardant left, so he tried to scoop up some water from a river, but the RV couple was about to fall off the bridge due to it breaking. Blade decided to not wait until he got repaired and help the RV couple to not fall. Dusty finally managed to scoop up some water, pushing his torque over 80%. He successfully put out the fire and saved the RV couple, but hurt himself in the process. Blade and Windlifter returned a badly damaged Dusty crop hopper to base, and Little Dipper, being a huge fan of Dusty, was watching him as he was getting repaired in hopes of seeing him finally open his eyes again. Maru, the repair pitty, managed to fix him and he finally woke up. Cad was finally fired and was replaced as the park superintendent. All seemed well until Dusty remembered its gearbox. Maru told him that he built him a custom-made gearbox that allowed him to push his torque over 80% again without crashing. Prop Wash was reopened, Mayday was refurbished, one of Dusty's friends, Chug, was crowned the official Corn Colonel, and Sparky, another one of Dusty's friends, became Chug's private nibbler. And finally, Dusty Crop Hopper continued racing and firefighting. It's a very nice story, and it's actually very similar to Planes 1, but done better. What do I mean by that? Well, you're about to find out. Despite how terrible its execution was, the bare-bones concept of Planes wasn't that bad. Again, as I've mentioned earlier, the message of this movie could have been that being comfortable is good, but they decided to trash that for a more generic underdog story ending. But honestly, Planes 2 is basically Planes 1, but better. As if they had learned their mistakes from the first movie, which is surprising considering that this is a World of Cars production and the fact that the two movies aren't even a year apart. Dusty's motivation in this movie has a lot more depth and reason to it. Unlike in the first movie, where Dusty just wants to become a racer because, oh, I want to prove to the world that I can do more than I was born for. In this movie, he actually has a more reasonable and realistic motivation. Has a lot more heart to it since he felt that he has unintentionally ruined Mayday's firefighting career, and he wants to cheer him up by getting Prop Wash reopened. And it makes sense because by then he had already realized that his racing career was coming to a pause, so he had nothing to lose. And this movie is way more original than the first Planes, since it now explores airborne firefighting instead of just racing like the Cars movies. It gives the world of Cars more plot and aesthetic variety. The movie follows a very similar road to the previous Planes movie. Dusty is an amateur at doing something, whether it's racing or firefighting, and recruits an old master of their craft to train him. Yet something, whether it be a fear of heights or a busted gearbox, is holding Dusty back from his true potential. Multiple times he disobeys the orders of his trainer because of the thing that's holding him back. But in the end, Dusty learns to let go of what's holding him back in a desperate moment so that he can achieve his goal. And it's definitely better executed here, since Dusty's reasoning to disobey his trainer in this movie is much more justified, and therefore makes for a much, much better version of what they tried to do in Planes 1. I mean, compare the reasoning of, "Wah, I'm too scared to fly high," to the reasoning of, "Hey, I will literally die if I do the thing you instruct me to do. So, sorry, not sorry." And unlike the first movie, Dusty is not rewarded for disobeying his trainer this time. It was already established that Dusty had a fear of heights in the first movie, and he was getting constantly rewarded for flying low, so he stayed comfortable and still win the races. It was a win-win situation. But no, Dusty had to get over his fears because of course he had to. But in Planes 2, he actually had to get over his fears. He was not pleasing his trainer, and he ended up damaging himself later. So he actually had some reasoning to get over his fears in this movie. Blade was right when he said you had to put everything you have on the line to save other people's lives. Dusty saw the RV couple almost dying, and he didn't want his lack of action to cause the death of those two RVs, like it almost did to Blade. So overall, it's like as if Disney just made Planes again, but way, way better. So yeah, it's Planes 1 but better. But like, why do you like it so much? Well, it's not just about the plot and improvements to the concept. Sure, there's smaller reasons, but these small reasons build up into a big reason. So I just wanted to add this section quickly with miscellaneous stuff that I like about this movie and overall franchise. Yeah, this is basically just me gushing over stuff that doesn't really matter, but I still want to talk about it. First of all, the animation. Now, one of the things I didn't like about the first Planes movie is that the animation doesn't look that good. Sometimes there aren't enough shadows, or some things are too bright, and honestly, at some scenes, the movie looks like a video game cutscene. But the animation in the second movie looks gorgeous. The scenes with fire look especially stunning, and the lighting is a big improvement from the last movie, which is quite impressive because, remember, the movies are only 1 year apart. Now, the movements of the vehicles sometimes feel unnatural, and the facial expressions sometimes look off, but this is Planes 2 Fire and Rescue. I'm not expecting Cars 3 level of realism in the characters' movements. And that's admittedly just a nitpick. The other aspects about the animation are still a huge improvement over the first one. Speaking of the animation, I like the technology and machinery in this movie. Like how the characters remove their landing gear when taking off, how they quickly fill up on water when they ran out of retardant, how Blade controls his crane hook thing, and how they detach and reattach when lifters tank. Sure, sometimes it might not be realistic, but you gotta admit that it at least looks cool. And I like how they have the restraint of making the main characters of the first movie simply secondary characters now. Dusty is really the only character from the first movie who matters. I love how they rewrite Dusty to not be a whiny, annoying character anymore, and basically shoved the others into the side and built up the main cast from scratch. It's as if they want you to forget about Planes 1, which is why I really just separate these two movies and ignore the first Planes. Similar to how Pixar really just ignored Cars 2. You know, if we just remove Planes 1 from existence and replace Cars 2 with Planes 2, we'd have the perfect trilogy. Also, I'd like to talk about the music. Honestly, the instrumental soundtrack isn't really memorable. Don't get me wrong, the music isn't bad at all, just not something I'd listen to in my free time like the Cars 1 and Cars 2 soundtracks. Although, the actual songs in the movie are pretty good. Still, I Fly is kinda cringe, but has a good message. It hammers in what Dusty is going through. It does its job, but it's just kinda painful to listen to. Like, no offense to whoever sung this song, but wait, who sung in that song again? No offense to Spencer Lee, but the singing is definitely not the best part about the song. I do like that one song that plays when Dusty and the gang fight their first fire in the movie. It's very catchy and I like the electric guitar solo at the start. And that one song in the credits was nice. And what else could I talk about? Alright, the merchandise. Of course, Mattel and Disney Store made some merchandise for this movie. Mattel made all the main variants of Dusty in this movie, including that one racer Dusty at the start of the movie that became very rare over the years. All the main characters and side characters, a dirty version of Chug for some reason. Unfortunate how they canceled Chug with that hat that appeared at the end of the movie, and Nick Lupin Lopez. That moment with Chug was very cute, and Nick was an important character and would have been nice to have. Oh, and the deluxes. So, fun fact, the plain singles are actually the same size as a deluxe in the Mattel Cars line, and therefore the Planes Deluxes are bigger than the Cars Deluxes. And man, does that allow for so many cool features. Little Dipper had a movable landing gear, Windlifter had a removable tank, and Blade Ranger, as well as Blaze and Blade, had a sliding door that reveals the hook thing Blade had in the movie. And it fully works. You can lower it and tow other vehicles on the ground. It was so cool. And then the line was discontinued. Great. My only complaint is that the planes look tiny next to the Mattel cars. Even cars in the Planes line look bigger than the Planes singles. Oh, and the pitties are way too big. So big, in fact, that when next to the big boy huge Disney Store planes, they don't look out of scale at all. So yeah, basically just some scaling problems, but other than that, the merchandise was alright. Tomka made a few planes and a cabbie playset that turns into a runway, which is admittedly pretty cool. And Mattel made their version that can hold a few smoke jumpers. Yes, that's their official name. And some of the playsets were cool. And yeah, I think that's enough for gushing about stuff that doesn't really matter. So to wrap things up, Planes 2 Fire and Rescue is actually not that bad of a movie. It's not a masterpiece or anything, but it's definitely nowhere near as bad as the first one. Which I know the first one is a reason for some people to not like the second one. If you don't want to watch the second one purely because of how bad the first one was, trust me, I was like you before. Just watch it and see what you think of it. Honestly, I think you might like it more than Cars 2, which is honestly not saying much since Cars 2 was horrible, but still, it's definitely not as bad as Planes 1. But again, this is a discussion video, so what do you think of this movie? Tell me in the comment section below. This has been a fun video to make. Sure, it has been difficult and even got delayed, but It's been fun talking about this movie. That's definitely the least talked about in the Cars community. But before I sign off, I'd like to thank a few people for giving me inspiration to make this video, particularly Aaron's World of Cars, or as he's known on Instagram, World of Cars Memes. He brought the movie up a couple of times on his Instagram and inspired me to rewatch it for the second time ever. And I'd also like to thank Trev Views on YouTube, as his Planes 2 video helped me with some of the points I made in this video and pretty much gave me the inspiration for making this video in the first place. Thank you all so much for watching. I appreciate it, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.